Okay, let's take a look at Assyrian Wars here. At least a final look. Maybe not completely final because someday I may revisit it. So if you watched my intro or parts of it, you could see I was completely frustrated by the rules. To the point where, before I made the video, I considered not playing this, putting it back up in its space in the shelf and finding something else, because it just, the rules are ambiguous. They are sometimes contradictory, in my opinion. Maybe there's some way of construing them that they make sense. I couldn't find it. They are lacking in aspects. They're incomplete. And perhaps worst of all of it, and it was still lit when I lit up anyway, the organization of the rules is just terrible. It is a big rule book for this as well. It clocks in, God knows how many pages, because they're not numbered, even though the index seems to be referenced into page numbers. And this certainly does, the table of contents here. But it looks like we're talking about 28 pages, a little short of 30 pages. However, those pages are 3 columns each, and I'd say you probably want to at least double the actual paper page count. So this is a big, heavy, complex game, especially for a CDG, maybe the most complex, maybe the heaviest that I've seen. There's a couple others that run up against the same kind of limit. And there's actually a point to be made about that, the complexity. I think there is a limit to the complexity that a CDG can carry. And it's really based on the card deck size. You could probably get twice as many cards in a game, and this game doesn't seem to need it. Most of the complexity in this game is not baked into the cards particularly, but the rules themselves contain a lot of complex subsystems, etc. So I think that's kind of where you get away with trying to reach above the complexity level of how many cards can you put in a game. And this game actually really does kind of stretch towards, although nowhere near the Europa Universalis level, which I think maybe exceeds the complexity level. Le Grand Guerre 2 that is kind of viable in a game, but this is pretty damn hefty as well. To have bad rules that are very, very complex is very, very troubling. But again, for me, it's the organization that's the worst thing, because I think you can't play this game without admitting either I am going to have to fudge it and make up rules and make up my own interpretation, or I'm going to have to go to some kind of online oracle who's played it, a few times and has really come to their answers about it, the way I feel like I have about EU, in contradiction to what maybe the EU community plays, and Le Grand Guerre and other really heavy, complex, but not well done rules. But those games I feel were a little bit better organized, a little easier to understand the rules. Not by much, but a little bit. This one was very frustrating. I'm also older, and it makes it harder, and I have more games, so it's harder for me to commit to that, yeah, I'm going to really work this one out. This is the game I'm so excited about. However, it turned out it was worth the effort. There's a very good game here. A very good CDG, but yeah, it's a very, very interesting game. One that models something that I'm not used to seeing. Now, it kind of fits because the antecedent of this was Napoleonic Wars. And you can really see how sort of the idea of that one against many policy in Napoleonic Wars it was actually extended and enhanced with this, in the sense, not only in the sense that this is a more complex game, etc., but in the sense that it's even more so that. The Assyrians are just kick-ass to a degree that Napoleon was not quite, and doesn't quite show in the Napoleonic Wars. So this is almost a step up in that direction of exploring that kind of space. And that led me to really question, is this game at all balanced? Because here I am playing and boom, boom, I'm scoring up all these points. Well, there are some end game points that I wasn't really taking into consideration, and I can't tell you if it's balanced or not. I suspect the internal dynamics of any group are going to, once they get used to playing this incredibly complex and heavy game, and have gotten a few games under their belt of it, they'll be able to kind of balance it on their own. It's not like an EU type game where you just say, you know, fuck it, there are people who have no chance, and that's all there is to it. It was quite possible to knock Assyria down, which we saw in the game, but it wasn't an overwhelming victory, even with everyone kind of working together to take them down, especially in the last couple turns, and to ignoring their own goals to some extent in order to just try to beat them down. Well, at least the way I interpreted the rules, it ended up being a significant amount, a fairly close game. You could get a significant amount of points with some of the lesser states. And so there is actually some play in there to have them slam against each other and try to, you know, compete a little bit with each other, but mainly they're there to beat up Assyria. What about components-wise, etc.? Well, I think I kind of went over most of this. The rulebook's hell. You have a simple rulebook. I scanned these a little bit. They might be okay for some of the smaller scenarios, but the truth of this is that you're not playing what Assyrian Wars is made for. There are other games you could play, like my Campaigns of King David, if you want a really light game. This one doesn't use the cards at all. It doesn't use, you know, the trade, all kind of things. It's just a very, very simple way to maybe get used to point-to-point movement and, you know, some of the interception and combat rules for this particular game. None of which are terribly complex in and of itself. So if you've never seen a point-to-point game before and you've never, you know, dealt with that flavor of interception or whatever, it might be worth playing a scenario of this. But it isn't until you get to the full game where you're getting all the bells and whistles, and that's where all the complexity and difficult stuff goes. You have a tutorial, which seems to contradict the rules of points, and doesn't really do a great job of helping. One thing it does do is it gives you some play guides and strategy, and that's kind of useful. And it gives you a manifest of the cards, which is always kind of helpful. But it doesn't really say what they do, which would be pretty damn helpful to spell out the actual usage of the cards. You know, I can't imagine this game being played competitively enough that people are terribly worried about what every card does, though. It's a big old deck that everyone shares. It's going to be random as hell. There's cards that some people can use, that only some people can use, or that part of the event on the card only some people can use. Usually when that's the case, there's an alternative event, the secret diplomacy, and there's always the operations point cost. Operation points for the cards. Interesting little feature is you get ops points for the card, or you pay ops points, or I'm sorry, action points. They had to change the acronyms in this, as they do in every fucking CDG out there. It's like, come on. You know, it would be like, and I've said this before, as if zones of control, and I've seen some games that call them zones of influence instead. If ZOC was just changed to IEA for influence extension area or something like that, just so that they didn't sound like they were ripping the game off completely. And this game is very much like Napoleonic Wars, but it will appeal to a different type of gamer, I think. I think the Napoleonic Wars is much more suited to the very competition-heavy gamer. It's something you can learn and study, and really, I've seen guys at Consim World who go there every time who are very, very competitive players play Napoleonic Wars, and they're like, boom, 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 I did that. You know, they just take their turn, they know exactly what they're going to do, and they're out for blood in it. And, you know, it's kind of interesting to watch. I'm iffy playing with them just because, at least when they're playing the games they really know, not only do I know I have no chance, I just feel like I'm, you know, at a completely different level than they are. And it's just not worth, you know, it's not worth gaming with people who've studied a particular game so very much for me. Maybe, you know, if you want to be studying it yourself, they're the best people in the world to play it against, because they're going to know, you know, all the tricks of the trade, and, you know, you're going to be competing against the best, but it's not my taste. You got a player aid card, which is somewhat anomalously called a quick start card. This is your main scenario card. There's another one kicking around in here too for a couple of the smaller scenarios. I guess there's another, they printed out a whole nother card for people who are kickstarting it, which gives you another light scenario. I griped about it not being in. You know, it's not a big deal. The cards themselves shuffle well. They're kind of flexible cards, seem like pretty good quality. I haven't seen them, you know, getting damaged, and I was playing with them. One thing about the cards that I'd like to point out, again, this is pure Napoleonic Wars here, and not these. These are kind of cute too. You have these little army group things, but they're just an organizational, well, they're part of the rules, but they're an organizational feature. But each country has a couple of home cards, and, you know, Here I Stand also used this. It's a nice way of distinguishing some of the player powers. Some of the player powers are not on the cards, though, but each player has kind of a summary of all their player powers, or some of them. And the counters are definitely quite nice. But while I'm looking at them, I can think of one of my little gripes. Yeah, nice quality counters. Which has to do with the bowman. In the advanced rules, which are of course mandatory advanced rules and or mandatory optional rules, I don't know. It sounds like something out of Paranoia, really. A bit of doublespeak there, but I don't know. There's they give different abilities to the different units. And bowmen are basically completely dominated by heavy units. There are times when bowmen are useful, but for the most part, you don't even want to carry them along with you. Even if you have hordes and hordes of them, you're going to probably cause so little damage because the enemy, if possible, is going to have hordes of heavy units. And it completely trumps the bowman. That feels a little funny. In particular, I feel light infantry forces maybe should have some harassing abilities and such not. And on the scale of the game, that probably relates to actually being able to do combat losses against a full force of heavies. The same way the Cavs should be able to and such not. Anyway, the bow archers, all the archers. Chariots are king in this game, and they have this kind of flexible, they can be used as heavies or as archers, your choice. Either way they count as cav, which is kind of cool. What's nice about that is you can choose not to use them as archers and just choose to use them as heavies so that they aren't complete crap. The game allows for sort of pillaging the enemy. First of all, your supplies are generally raised just by pillaging the enemy, which does economic damage to them and keeps your own army fed, which is cool. But the actual supplies, the actual economic power that you have is transportable, which is to say if somebody has transported and gained economic power, you can take it back from them or take it from them if it wasn't yours to begin with. Syria has a special ability to kind of steal from everyone, but it requires a card play to do. And the Medes have an ability to generate essentially tremendous wealth as they sort of form together as a nation. I think the flow of the game will always start out with Assyria just kicking ass, able to take down what it wants early. Then things kind of maybe get gummed up, and they end up maybe not being able to take everyone out in a turn or something, or not able to. Basically, they can march in, take out an opponent or two, and then there's only 4 opponents to them. Then the next turn, take out the other 2. Well, there's opponents that are hard to take out. Egypt especially. Egypt's sitting way out of the way in the map. And by the way, the map is functional. It's, you're kind of, not quite bubbles everywhere, but very much readable style point-to-point map. Not as attractive maybe as some others, but at least you can play on it, right? So anyway, there's this kind of pattern and flow of the game that works out that there comes this tipping point where Assyria starts having trouble, and I think it's going to almost be invariable that it happens. And then there comes a point when all their enemies are open to them and hitting them at once. And that's the big thing that brings them down. They're able to knock them off piecemeal initially, but they can't keep it up, even though they gain economically midway through the game or whatever. They just don't have the ability to maybe reach Egypt very easily at all. If I had gone all out on Egypt, I could have taken them down, but then I probably would have had bigger problems than Assyria itself. So that's kind of the flow, and then as you get to the end, Assyria is probably going to get carved up. The question, of course, then becomes, is there squabbling that kind of prevents that, or do they manage to hold together? And then, well, if it wasn't close, why are they doing so? Yeah, whatever. But yeah, it's going to have that kind of flow to it, and I think that's a pleasant flow to the game. I don't remember enough of Napoleonic Wars to remember if Napoleon has the ability to pick people off early and then it ends up snowballing into a situation that he can't do that in. But this definitely does. At least in my playing, it definitely did. And I think it looks like it's a common thing. Combat itself, not really buckets of dice any more than Axis and Allies. It's not like, oh, you get bunches of dice and you're looking for a certain target. Each unit has its own target, and there are special rules to modify each of the different types of units. Economy is a big deal in it. The mercenaries especially, because they are so cheap compared to your regulars, but they disappear. But the thing is, if you're going to lose them in battle anyway, it might as well be mercenaries. Assyria has all kind of benefits in battle, but every power has its own little tricks that it can play and its own little special abilities. So it works out, nicely in terms of each person has sort of their own way of approaching the game. Nothing earth-shattering like Dunes or Cosmic Encounters kind of special powers that really kind of destroy the game. Just, some combat bonuses for the Assyrians. The Medes one is pretty potent because you can't knock them out of the game completely, although you can knock out their ability to become economic powerhouses if you do knock them out completely. If you eliminate them, they come back, but they come back without what is their really most potent advantage. But they're really hard to hit too, not as hard as Egypt, but close. And so they have a pretty nice combination of abilities. You have all these minor powers to do diplomacy on. They each get their own turns, just like Napoleonic Wars. They have their own cards, they have their own home cards, all kind of their own little special rules in some cases. It all works together as sort of a very much richer tapestry if you really wanted to make Napoleonic Wars into a much more complex game. And as such, I had a lot of fun with it. How historically accurate is it? Jeez, you know, when you're looking at this scale, and especially this far back in the past, there's kind of a fucked if I know, but you kind of get that overall flow of Assyria being able to kick ass for maybe three and a half turns, and then the end one or two turns is going to be the tide turning completely against them under any reasonable circumstances. Players, of course, can throw monkey wrenches in that whole situation. Anyway, I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm glad that I not only purchased it, but actually buckled down and, you know, forced myself to cope with it and to enjoy it. This is a game that should not have come out into printing. It needed a lot more development, but you know, such is life. I heard hints of a reprint coming out. I looked at their living rules. They don't look significantly better. There are presumably changes, at least the index has been added, and page numbers, but there's a lot. First of all, the core organization is the same, and I found a couple of instances where I had to look things up that I thought, well, maybe it's clearer here at this point. No, it wasn't. So this is really kind of a, you're going to have to work hard to get these rules to something that you like, whether that's, you know, hunting down people who will answer your questions, who made it up for themselves, or making it up for yourself. And of course, you know, the people who made up the rules for themselves first become sort of the established, you know, and accepted interpretation of them. But it may not be what was intended, and it may not be what is best, and what was intended may not be what is best. When you got a mess like this, you never know. Alright, let's send it up.